Hello.
Morning, Bradley. How are you?
Morning. How are you?
Good, good.
What's,
Oh,
where are you? Oh, you look like you're in a studio somewhere.
yep, I'm in a ballet studio in New
Oh.
York City. Yeah, so I'll be kind of sitting in on the meeting more than talking a lot.
Yeah.
But I'll be able to give an update.
Oh, good. Yeah. That would be great.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, we're just waiting for people to show up. So.
Yeah, that's
Oh,
where
no.
we're at now.
Yeah.
So that's okay. That feels normal. How was your week?
Oh, pretty good. I've been working on some things with different people, and yeah, pretty good. Yeah,
Good.
post GSOC. I was going to ask you about your class.
Sure.
We have like a couple of people who are working on it, and I saw that you sent some materials for the evaluations. So I get those emails.
Yep. Good.
Yeah.
Great. Yeah. No need to respond unless you want to.
All right. Yeah. So,
Yeah.
I mean, is everything going all right? Do you need any help or any kind of support?
I think so. I think so far everything is going fine. We're at the stage where we're at with the class is that our next assignment is to kind of have our development environment already up and running, and I've already done that, so we're in good shape. And I am going to send a revised version of the. So we made all these like system data flow diagrams and some GUI sketches and things like that. So we're going to resubmit those in a couple days, and you'll get that email too. And so especially I think with regard to the graphical user interface, the GUI stuff, if you have any preferences, right now the student who's in charge of it is kind of taking a very corporate direction with it, which isn't bad. It's very interesting. So be interesting to see how that develops.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, what do you mean by corporate? Like just drab?
I guess I just mean that it looks very like if you went to the site of a major communications company rather than an open source like computational modeling project right now. So that's not bad. It's just different than I was expecting.
It's not horrible. It's just because like the standard there is like
right.
Here's the stuff. Here's like a button, and
exactly.
it may not be in the right place.
Yeah, exactly.
But you're being evaluated on like usability. I take it like as part of a.
Yeah, mostly in fact that class. And sorry, Amanda, if this is super boring. It's good to see you. Hi. Where mostly the class is about just the ability to complete a project. So I think it's up to us of the ORL side of things to kind of make sure that everything lines up with what we're expecting out of it. So, but I mean, I'm trying to keep it as simple as possible. I just want to make a platform so that as we finish these computational models, people can use them. That's it, and we're almost there already, so it shouldn't be difficult.
Oh, okay, that sounds good. Sounds great.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if we're going to be able to write a new extension for NetLogo Web. Like that's probably not going to happen. But I'm excited about those kinds of things for what to do after this part of the project is completed. So that's exciting.
Yeah, that's good. Thanks for the information on that. I want to make sure that we stay on top of that, or that Jesse and I will stay on top of that because we're sponsoring the group. So
yeah, I'll make sure to let you know if there's something you need to do ahead of time. But but at the moment you're all right.
All right. Yeah. Thanks. So I guess that was your update, unless you have other things you wanted to mention.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really right now. I mean, I've got a lot of things going on in my life, but when it comes to ORL, I think it's mostly that project. And I am working on another blog post, but I haven't had a chance to really even get an outline for it up yet. So nothing to report.
Oh yeah, don't worry about that. You just got one out. You don't need to do one every week, but
boom, every week.
Well, thank you. That was good. That was very good. Thanks for the update. Hello, Samantha.
Hey Bradley, hey Brian, hey Amanda.
Hi.
How are you guys?
All right.
You good?
So did it, Samantha or Amanda want to go first on an update? I know Amanda came in.
I can go ahead.
Okay.
I listened to some of the conference on computational psychiatry on their website. The 2022 was released. It's not well categorized. Like, it's not really separated into talks. It's mostly just like a recording of each day. But I've been listening to that as I clean EEG data. So I haven't really been able to read, but I've been able to listen to that. It's been interesting. For another reading group, I read some papers on the philosophy of dance, which was very interesting. Definitely related to like embodied cognition.
Yeah.
One of them was about whether proprioception is an aesthetic sense. So vision and hearing are aesthetic senses. This is real loose, but we perceive beauty through sight and hearing. More up for debate whether taste or touch or smell can be aesthetic senses. But this paper was about whether proprioception, like the feeling of where your body is, can be an aesthetic sense. And the author argued that not only is the answer yes, but we can proprioceptive the aesthetic qualities of dancers' movements by watching dance. We can proprioceptive another person's body is the short version. So that was very interesting. And I've actually been thinking about that a lot as it relates to some of the phenomenology that Fuchs talks about.
Right.
That's about it for an update. Still gathering resources and trying to organize my thoughts for the various projects. The Cognition Futures reading group was good this week.
Oh yeah, thanks. That was great. Yeah, the proprioceptive stuff sounds interesting. I mean, it's definitely relevant to a number of things in the group. Of course, the Fuchs phenomenology work, but also VR and AR, and like knowing where your body is with respect. If you're in like a virtual world or a semi-virtual world, registering where your body is with respect to things in the environment, virtual objects, real objects, or just having a sense of where you are. There's actually a lot of interesting work on that people have done. I don't know how. I mean, I can't put my fingers in any references right now, but people have looked at, and I don't know if they've actually measured it. It's kind of a hard thing to actually measure, but there's of course a neuroscience literature on it where they try to figure out if you like wearing different things like a hat, how does that affect your movements, or how do you sense things that you're wearing, or where you are in space if you're going through a doorway or something. So it's kind of an interesting area. It's definitely underexplored, let's just say.
Yeah, I wasn't thinking about VR when reading that paper, but that's really interesting in the context of aesthetics. Like if proprioception can be an aesthetic sense and you can perceive beauty through your like inner sense of your body, then that like opens the door for like maybe a new kind of like VR art. Like if a VR can make you experience something in a certain way. I don't know what the details would look like, but that's interesting.
Yeah. Well, anyways, yeah, we'll talk more about it maybe Wednesday, or I don't know if you have any. Well, I don't have any references today to go over, but definitely it's something we should follow up with.
I can share the papers. I think that they would be relevant to the group.
Yeah. Thank you, Amanda. Samantha, did you have an update, or just how are you doing?
I've got a small update this week. Wasn't really research focused, but I've been doing pretty well so far. Besides trying to prep the 4 research papers I have to do, I've got my focus on my modern technologies affecting emergency emergency management paper down to just artificial intelligence and virtual reality. I feel like I have to focus on one, but it's like choosing your favorite child. You know you have one, but you don't want to pick one. So I have to do that. And I've got the creative project I'm working on down to either the Alzheimer's and dementia app I spoke about last week, or there's something that my professor suggested to me about like what I do with my summer work, how I teach robotics to younger children. They do a program here at Albany to like promote STEM to younger ages, and there was something he suggested I could do that and get credit for it. So I thought that sounded interesting. Other than that, I've been speaking to Morgan a lot after last week, and he sent me a couple people to connect with and things like that. So that's been a highlight of my week, speaking to Morgan.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's my update.
Well, that's great. Thank you. Yeah. Sounds like you're keeping up with things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not
So,
very good.
yeah. Yeah. I mean, narrowing down your topic is always kind of one of those things where you want to do everything, but you can only do a certain area. But that's good. I look forward to seeing that. Yeah. Jesse said something in the chat here on. I remembered that program. I was curious how it goes.
Yeah, I'm not sure how they do it either, because Dean Goodall kind of stopped it when like the pandemic hit for obvious reasons, and people weren't as interested. She's wanted to like start it back up. So I have to pick my topic first and then see who I connect with to go forward with it.
Yeah. Well, thank you for the update.
Of course.
And so, Jesse, how are you?
I'm good. I'm currently I'm traveling. I've been traveling all week. I've been visiting family stuff and taking care of some things there. But I'm good. I don't. There's been a lot to process since the robot. I don't have any major updates since then, but the robot is good, and Cognition Futures radio group has been really good, and also this week was the last week of Alicea. Johan's group was going through, and I feel like I think it would be really good for everybody in the lab basically to watch the last video session. Because the final chapter is kind of the recap of it. If I had my notes or it was on my laptop directly, I would basically have it so that Johan kind of describes it as a manifesto. Like the whole book is kind of a big position piece about, hey, maybe we can move forward. What are some ways we can move forward in this area of reason, computational reason, and mathematics and computation, some philosophy behind it, and so what sort of a potential way to explore. Tuesday night, it was like an hour and a half long meeting, and then there was another almost 2 hours beyond that wasn't recorded. And I really wish it was, because the stuff that was talked about there was so rich. Because he had somebody from who really knew topology well, or was like a computational science professor, and it was first than that kind of joined us. And you have Johan, who's kind of this. I'm really curious about Johan's take on how neuroreduction is plasticity, because I don't think it's very much, but I feel like I really think I appreciate his perspective as a biology person who doesn't think cognitive science is complete BS, but also like there's sort of limits to that, and so that whole discussion Tuesday was just, I took a bunch of notes and I haven't had any time to refine them yet. But the video is great. I really would recommend maybe the first two videos and then the second video or recording, I guess. Johan does a great job of breaking down stuff, as always. But it's sort of, you know, what is Cavia's movement towards, okay, well, what, you know, using his take on the topology theories and type theories, where can we go, and kind of like some of the questions led into. I kind of got into this during the first recording, the first bit of the video, so I won't belabor the point unless we want to go there. But there were a lot of like sub discussions about co-articulation, about pattern matching, about what is, like, can there be a new foundational approach to like the mathematics behind, well, mathematics in general, but also the mathematics that's sort of enabling a lot of the discussion about how we understand a lot of the cognitive stuff. So to kind of zoom out a bit, going back between Johan's great stuff doing, but especially active, there were actually a lot of implicit ties to, we didn't center on this, but there were a lot of implicit ties to interpretability and explainability of AI. And between We Robot and that discussion too, is like, it's this quest towards what I think another angle of the whole discussion with Johan and other things in general, like the quest towards what can we fully bring to making explicit in how we can articulate it, and how can we define it, how can we say, okay, here's actually what's happening in this case. And I feel like that's sort of the boundary for a lot of stuff. And even going to Fuchs, and this is sort of the big tie-in, is like there's a certain, you know, I feel like calling this whole thing like sympathy for the devil, in the sense that there's an important sympathy to have for the reductionist paradigm that exists. Like, it's there for a reason. It's maintained and kind of established in certain power structures for bogus reasons, but like it's there for a reason. And so I feel like so much of the real deal is like, how do we actually, you can be polemic about it. And I think Fuchs is right to be polemic about saying, you know, a heavy critique of it. I think that's warranted, especially for what he's trying to do. But I think the bigger, broader picture is like, how do you sort of reconcile like the strength of what reduction has been able to brought us with the areas that it is completely not really relevant at all. And so I think some of the mathematical stuff that Logiciel is getting at, and if nobody knows, Logiciel is a really nice, there's some really deep cuts that go way back. Like it's a very historically well articulated and situated like book and argument and everything. So I want to kind of sit down and read the book as much as I can at some point. But I feel like for our projects, I don't know if it's what we can totally read for the reading group itself, but I think it's something that would be a really good set of references for some of the things we're doing ahead. Obviously, Brian's working on like the intuition and stuff and presented on that, and a lot going in that direction. But I think there's a lot there. So that's kind of my very light preview discussion of all that stuff. Outside of that, I've been thinking quite a bit about some of the methodology work. We had Neuromatch, which was, I think we'll talk more about that later, so I won't get into that. Neuromatch, which was good, and there are actually a couple of really good panels, but I'll save that for later. I think it's fascinating to look at Neuromatch over time. And for me, particularly because Neuromatch happened first when I just graduated and was like, what am I going to study or do now? And now 2.5 years later, it's like, oh, I'm not at that same point anymore. So But yeah, I know outside of that, I know I have to kind of set up if a couple new people join the lab. And so the person from We Robot, I think her name was Margaret, reached out to me. So we may have we have 2 new people from, I think, Albany that have kind of joined, and I have to bring them on board. I don't think they're going to be here today. Margaret from We Robot, and I think she's from Washington. She probably won't be able to make these meetings. I think it's super early for her. So there's some lab admin stuff there, and then it's sort of like the other lab admin thing I will say is it's October. October's here, and so at least it will be. And it's, you know, what do we want to focus on in the next couple of months? Open house, big projects ahead. There's still the VR stuff to sort out with a lot of the methodology stuff that's blooming, and it's sort of it's been my free time to sort of push that forward has been very limited recently. So I think probably about stuff this week that I may be missing, but I think that's it for me. Unless you can remember something. Oh, you should want to say this or that.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that car trip report. It's great. Yeah, I think that, yeah, we should look forward, and some of the things you mentioned are definitely some things we've talked about and kind of keep pushing back. The open house, of course, and then the VR stuff is sort of perpetually we're trying to find a space, and then we kind of have in some ways we've gotten some interest in, we can't really do a lot of things that maybe we could do if we had a physical lab, if we were focusing on experimentation, or if we were doing like development for a platform. But I think I think we're kind of maybe finding a niche. I'm not really sure what that is yet, but I know Samantha's been interested, Jesse's been interested. We've had some discussions in terms of shared interfaces and things like that. And of course, some of the philosophy connections to this. So yeah, we have a bunch of things that we kind of have a constellation of interests. Then the next step is to kind of come up with a way to express that, whether it's a paper or some sort of thing that we make, or there are many ways we can do that. So that's sort of the end point. So right now we kind of have, I think, a pretty decent selection of things that we maybe can pick from and drive forward somehow. But you were going to say something?
Yeah, I remembered other stuff.
Okay.
Plot twister.
Okay.
So I had maybe not last Sunday, which is very far away in my mind from what's happened in the earlier days than that. There was a number of meetings that took place Sunday, and some of them were plot twisters related. So to be quick about it, I'll say there may be. I'm curious to potentially set up like a kind of. This is a very early level idea. I kind of want to find almost like a cooperative internship between plot twisters and the orthogonal lab, in the sense of there's certain game world mechanics that are related to, in this case, we had a discussion about like for characters in the game world, either auto generation of text or how to shape text or dialogue around certain concepts or discussions or things in the game or potentially aspects of empathy or nonviolent communication, or like these sort of not really clinical, but like trauma informed. These sort of how could we help generate either text or specific modeling or other stuff like that? And I think there's because I was kind of asked, like, hey Jesse, like what's the latest take on technology that can do this? And it's like, well, I know a little bit about that, but that could kind of be, that might be a really fun thing for someone to just dive into if they're interested in virtual worlds or generative stuff in that sense. I know there's a whole game major at UAlbany, so you can maybe reach out there specifically. But that was interesting, and there's a few other. I'll leave it at that. I don't want to take up too much time. But plot twisters collaborations are interesting. If anybody looks at like plot twisters.org and is interested in that, or knows somebody who would be interested in sort of creation of a game world and sort of, it's a really interesting mix of creating an environment or a game world in some capacity. We haven't yet decided on some of the platforms and mediums.
I think we lost Jesse. I don't know. Oh, he's back. All right. Yeah. So that was his. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, that was my conclusion. So I don't know where it got cut off, but I'm just saying, if people are interested in that sort of thing, just reach out to me. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's, and I know that there's some work being done on like generating assets for video games through using like machine learning and things like that. So I don't know how that overlaps, or like if it's more about like generating stories. There's some computational method. It doesn't have to be machine learning. It could be some other technique, or something like that. And again, we have the VR interest area, so it's pretty broad. And so how does that fit into that? I mean, that's of course, video games are VR. I guess they're considered VR, so that would be good. And I think definitely we should follow up on the path of success of bringing people in from the UAlbany programs and bringing them into the lab. We've had this last spring, which was, I think, successful. We had a number of people come through, and then this fall, we'll have some more people. But we have we kind of have an established pipeline now of what we expect and what people can do. So I think that if we can set them up with something, we have to kind of define the task, the project scope, and then let them do something. So I know that like with Brian, we had this project where we had Google Summer of Code as a template. So it was like a project that we proposed to Google Summer of Code. Brian picked it up, and of course Himanshu and Hussein did this as well, and then did a project and then moved it towards a collaboration with other people. And so I mean that's the kind of path we're going to follow. And I think if we do it in collaboration with Plot Twisters, it might be something similar to that. We have a template, we say this is what we want to do, and then people engage with it, and then maybe we have some cross interaction with Plot Twisters, and then it's if we could maybe get some funding, all the better. But at least it's like something we know is we know kind of what we want to do at the end of like 3 months. So we have the open-ended internships, and we have the sort of the closed project, the more closed projects. And I think doing something like a more closed project might be suitable for this, but it might also be that we have an open internship in collaboration with Plot Twisters where we have, like they spend some time learning certain skills. So it would be like in Plot Twisters, I don't know if Jenny's thought about like what kind of skills that she's imparting to people in plot twisters, what the sort of the way they run projects there. But it's, it would probably be good to have like, some close collaboration with plot twisters, maybe, do things that they can't do or bring some expertise, because we focus on computational modeling and things like that. Yeah, we can bring that to, and then they have the storytelling aspect, so it just kind of fits together like that. Yeah, it's great. Well, thanks for the update, Jesse. Yeah, so I don't know if anyone else had anything they wanted to bring up before I move on here. Thanks to everyone for their updates, and yeah, keep up the good work. So yeah, we're moving towards into October. We have a number of things going on. Maybe for the rest of the year, we have new interns that we need to onboard and get them going on some sort of set of projects or experiences, or however they want to spend their time. We also have the open house, which is something I haven't really spent a lot of time on myself. So, but and I got to think maybe of how to make this sort of guide it towards the path of least resistance. So I don't want to burden everyone with like a large talk, or don't want to burden everyone with a lot of work on it. But basically, it might be concurrent with an end of the year report. So like if we say, what did we do this year? That would be the open house, what we kind of talk about in the open house. And I don't know if people, have time to do like a whole, maybe a very short talk, or just have like a discussion of what they're doing, or, I mean, there are different ways you can approach it. I would probably suggest maybe at least preparing some PowerPoint slides, or thinking about what you've done in the last year. If you're involved in a project, kind of say, this is the project, this is what we're doing, this is what I'm interested in. I really want to just see where we are with things, and I want to see where we want to go. And that's, I think, if we, we broadcast that to a larger audience, not just our own, maybe people see that and say, oh, I want to be involved in that, or, I didn't know that existed. So that's where we want to go with that. I'm still working on the details. I think we'll have like an overview. We'll have some things on GSOC, maybe on the internship program, and report on all the different things we've done. Because I've actually, this week I was updating the website, and I noticed that there were a lot of things missing. And we had this discussion last week about updating websites, but it's actually a nice exercise because you get to see exactly what you've done in a certain amount of time. And we've done a lot of things this year. We've done a number of conferences. Neuromatch went well, I think. Neuromatch was odd because it was asynchronous, but Jesse was involved and I was involved. So we'll probably go over that a little bit in a minute. But I just wanted to say, I'm glad, I'm happy with the year so far, and hopefully by the end of the year we can put together a nice open house that's, recaps everything and tells us where we want to go in the future. So, and then we have other initiatives that are ongoing. So we have this nice vein of philosophy that we're getting. We have different ideas, and again with VR, it's we have these different ideas that people want to pursue, and then the sort of the way forward is to bring those together in some way and work towards some sort of artifact, whether it be a paper or a project presentation for a conference or blog posts, or and then those things can take on a life of their own. So yeah.
One thing with VR that I just thought of that we could do with our limited resources is like a set of project proposals for those who have sophisticated VR equipment and the more sophisticated setup. We could like maybe try to do some of the conceptual work and write something that part of the conclusion would be like like project proposals or directions for research based off of what we can do with, just the philosophy and the virtual lab.
Yeah, that would be good. We talked, I don't know, well, we talked about field finding papers and things like that. So that may be something and then something Jesse, I think with Cognition Futures, one of the things that we do in that group, aside from some of the stuff we talked about in the reading group, is kind of mapping out the sort of the frontiers of a field or the rich veins of a field that come together. So, yeah, that would be good. That would be a good thing to weigh out some things in the field.
I wanted to mention also that a friend of mine who recently joined the lab, Matthew, is a PhD student in the game studies department at RPI. And does most of his work on VR. So I've been talking to him about Orel for a long time, and so he finally jumped on the Slack and the VR Discord recently.
Okay.
So he's probably going to be a good resource for VR related things. So I'm excited that he's joined. Thanks, Matthew, if you ever watch this.
Yeah. I saw him in the Slack, so welcome, Matthew. And well, hopefully, yeah, we can maybe tailor some things to him, or we can pick his brain about things. Yeah, so that would be great. Yeah. So yeah. So any other comments on that? I think that's something we'll just be talking about in the upcoming weeks. But anyways, yeah. So I'm gonna actually go to the Slack, and I want to go over some Slack channel things just to kind of review where we are with that. So this is the lab Slack, and we have a number of different channels here. Of course, as we all know, if you're new to the Slack, there's a Slack pass off of the main website. You can join the Slack, and you can get access to these things. And so the rules are basically you come into the general channel, you announce yourself. There's Matthew, and then you introduce yourself, tell us what you're interested in. And you're free to explore the channels and kind of pick up on some of the threads that are going on. So, we have a number of threads. We have biologically oriented channels like brain organoids and bioevolution. We have Brainberg vehicles, which is part of our computational agents work. CGS. There are some other ones like data science ML, developmental AI. And they're different. You have to join the channel to see what it's about. But just to take a look around. If you're new to the Slack, or even if you're not, there may be channels you don't know about. I have a full suite of channels in my Slack because I'm the administrator here, so I have to know all the channels. So we have Cognition Futures. This is our group where we do a lot of stuff with cognitive science and history and philosophy of cognitive science and different things like that. So we're always posting interesting things in here. A lot of things on philosophy. We've been reading the Thomas Fuchs book, of course, for our reading group. And that happens on Wednesday nights, 9 o'clock Eastern time in North America. So if you're not in North America, it might be a little hard to make the meetings, but we try to cover a lot of things here in the meeting. We go through different books, and then we kind of bring things in from elsewhere as well. So we have Fuchs, this book, I think it's Ecology of the Brain. And this is a video that sort of goes over some of the things that he talks about in the book, some of the concepts. It's interesting doing a philosophy reading group because you base it off of a book, but you try to go to it at a speed that sort of works for everyone. So we sometimes get we spend maybe an entire hour on part of a chapter, and that's okay because it gives you this, rich background. You can bring up different things. And we've actually, in this group, we've talked a lot about scientific measurement and other types of topics. So it's really kind of, it's growing like different tentacles in different directions. It's nice. Jesse maintains a Notion page for that. And then this is a picture we did last week where we talked about the Umwelt, which is a construct that was developed by von Uxküll. Oxcal. And this was out of, I think, the area of ethology or animal behavior. And this was back in the 20s, but they came up with this idea of having an internal world or an internal milieu where you have, it could be a subject versus an object, or it could be like some sort of closed loop feedback system where you have things that are being regulated. And so there's this communication within the system. There's this internal milieu, which is something they mention in homeostasis, the literature on homeostasis, but it wasn't connected to homeostasis necessarily in this work. So we've talked about things like this, and then that has relevance to our agents work. That also has relevance to our cybernetics interests. So there are a lot of tentacles growing out of this reading group. And I might add that this also, we also kind of revisit some of the history of ideas here, because this is an idea that's historical, and it's interesting to place some of these ideas in a historical context. So like I mentioned, this is something that predates the work that Cannon did on homeostasis, which is sort of like homeostasis in the context of physiology. But nevertheless, some of these same concepts sort of resurface. And so it's interesting to see like some of these ideas, people develop them, and they develop them in a historical context. And sometimes that historical context is pretty deep. And then we have some things on plot twisters. There's this relationship between our lab and plot twisters, which is the storytelling group. And they're doing a lot of things with narratives and storytelling and things like that. So we have papers in here as well. This is a paper I posted. You should be able to access it. This is by David Popel, who's a pretty famous cognitive scientist. He's a linguist and a co-author. And this is in Trends in Cognitive Science. They always have these provocative sort of position pieces or things like that. This is from their 25th anniversary series. This is a forum article. And it's called "We Don't Know How the Brain Stores Anything, Let Alone Words." So this is, going back to this idea of representations in the brain and in the mind, I guess. And how do things get stored? How do things get represented in memory? In how do we recall things? And this is kind of this linguistics point of view. So this is, these are things we're doing. We're doing a lot of stuff with cognitive science, and I just wanted to point that out to people. I think I had there's Morgan. Hello, Morgan. All right. Okay, Jesse's got to go pretty soon, so thanks for attending, Jesse. Okay, so that's the Cognition Futures channel, and then we have this thing here where there's and I posted this, and it wasn't because of the being in this study, which you'd have to be in the UK to do, but it's this idea of a third thumb, which is like if you have your two hands and you have two thumbs, one on each hand, and then you have this third thumb. And what this is a prosthetic that they've made that you put on your hand. And we talked about this with respect in the Cognition Futures reading group, I believe, about different types of prosthetics you can add to the body. So the idea is you have your body, it's represented through proprioception, through vision, and you know where your body parts are, you know where your hand is and your thumb. And when you grip something with your hand, you use your thumb as an opposable digit, you can grasp things. And you know where that object is in space, you don't have to look at it to confirm. So there's this whole, sort of body schema that we build in terms of how we represent different parts of our body and the immediate environment around our body. When you add in a prosthetic like this, and this is why they're doing this study, how does this get represented in that schema? Is it a novel thing? Can you do novel things with it? Does it get represented in the same way that manipulating things with your real thumb does? I don't know if there's any feedback in this device, but if there is, it has to be mapped somehow to your nervous system, into your brain and into that schema. And so this is, I posted this just to kind of give an idea of what this looks like. And this is something we talked about with, different body prosthetics, but also like the rubber hand illusion, where if you have a rubber mallet and you hit the hand, or you have like a virtual hand and you hit it with a hammer, you think it's like your real hand and you flinch or you have some reaction to it. So there's an interaction between hitting a hand with a hammer and some sort of response. And even if the hammer isn't exactly the same as a real hammer, or the hand isn't the same as a real hand, you still have that reaction as if it were. So this is all part of this idea of a bodily representation, and it's very important to VR because sometimes you'll treat virtual objects as real objects. So that's why that's relevant. And then Amanda posted these dance and embodiment papers that we talked about earlier. So, we have a channel on cybernetics. We have actually a nice book here, I think, on neo-cybernetics, emergence and embodiment. So this is something Amanda mentioned in our reading group. And then we have, Ethics, Society, and Tech, which is this channel for a lot of the stuff we're doing with ethics and philosophy of technology and things like that. And as I'm too active recently, there are a couple things in here, a couple events that were advertised. We have this new channel on philosophy and measurement. So this is something we talked about last week, and we actually established this channel. So now we have some interesting papers or interesting features in here. We have the Bayesian rabbit holes, decoding conditional probability non-commutative algebra. So this might be interesting to Brian as well as Morgan and some other people, where you're like looking at these alternate types of mathematical representation and some of these, the implications of that. Amanda put something in on scientific realism, and then this paper on the origin of phenomenology of attention. So this is a nice paper on the phenomenology of attention, and it's really kind of relevant to what we've also been talking about in the Cognition Futures reading group, but also some of the other stuff we've talked about with philosophy. So that might be something to check out. And then we have this open chat forum, which gives our reports. I know people have requested that I put them on these reports. So we have a bot that if you want to join, if you want to be accountable to the bot, you can I can set you up and you can answer these questions. Just ask you some questions. It's a traditional tech stand-up where, try to diagnose if you have any stumbling blocks or anything. But this is all stuff that, if you want to do this, it's open for you. May keep you accountable once a week, but it also may become burdensome. But anyways, it's up to you. And then we have some other channels on information theory, and other types of mathematics, and some of our other projects like metabrain models and game theory. And, some of these things aren't as active right now, but they're definitely worth checking out some of the things. Because I know Morgan posts in a lot of different channels, and I post in different channels when there's something interesting. And it's really kind of a hive mind thing where you can get, you can put papers in and you can look at what people are thinking about and what they might want to explore in different topical areas. So that's all I'm going to talk about with the Slack. Hello, Morgan. I don't know if you're available to talk right now.
Yeah, not quite yet. I'm just out picking up some stuff. Actually.
Okay.
I'll be online in just like 5 minutes.
Okay. Yeah. So yeah, thanks for we'll talk to you in a little bit. So, I wanted to go over. I wanted to revisit our submissions document, and then I'll talk a little bit about Neuromatch. So the submissions document is this document that we use to sort of put down things that we want to submit to or deadlines that we want to meet. And then we review them in the meeting so we can make sure that we're getting there. So we've done a lot of things already this year. We've got, well, the year's almost over actually, but we have a lot of different things in the queue. Some of the things haven't been realized, like this dual inheritance for developmental agents paper. That was never realized. But there are also things like these different abstracts that were realized. And so everything in green is things that have been accepted and maybe put out there in the world, like the We Robot work, the New York Celebration of Women in Computing, some of the NetSci stuff, the EI conference, EI workshop. But some of this, so this is just a way to organize all these things and to make sure that we can get them done and we have them in front of us. So again, like if you have conferences you want to put on this, please let me know. You can actually put them in the Slack, probably in this events channel, maybe that would work, or in one of these other channels. So, I don't want to, you can put it in directly if you have a link. I can send the link if people are interested. But basically, there's nothing much to report except that, we're working on this scientific realism paper for Synthese. There's this Flame conference, which is yet, we don't really have the details on that. But then there are other things like this, hackathons and other events. So please let me know if there's something people want to put into this document. Now I'm going to talk about Neuromatch. So Neuromatch was an event, a great success, I think. Jesse was asking, like, why aren't we, or maybe he's making a statement as to maybe we need to look back at Neuromatch, the different, flavors of it over the last 2 years, because it's been 2 years since Neuromatch started. It started as a way for people to have a conference experience during the pandemic when everything was canceled and you had everything virtually. And they started Neuromatch 1, I think when it was April of 2020, I believe. And they had 2 Neuromatches that year. I think 2. It was like April and September. And those first 2 Neuromatches, we didn't really coordinate as a lab. I think I presented one thing per Neuromatch. And I think Jesse presented something during Neuromatch. And that was it. Then in Neuromatch 3, we had I was going back over the materials for it and kind of making lists of things that have been submitted. So Neuromatch 3, and I don't have it in front of me, but that's okay. So Neuromatch 3, we actually had 5 submissions, and they were all very interesting and diverse. We had one of our presentations was on developmental AI. We had one on some of the work we were doing in our DevoWorm group on diatoms, which are these marine microorganisms, but looking at the sort of the psychophysics of their perceptual systems or their behavior. I also did I did a paper with, it was one of the, someone who doesn't come to the meetings anymore, I'm blanking on his name, Krishna Katyal. And we did a paper and a talk on the difference between biological neural networks and artificial neural networks. So that was an interesting exploration of that space. So, that's when we really started to have like our group collaboration and coordinating between people. So that was 3. And then 4 was, I think, last fall. So fall of 21. So I think 3 was in the spring of 21. 4 was in the fall of 21. And we had 4 submissions in Neuromatch 4. Ankit Grover and myself, we did a switching abstract or a switching paper, or I guess it was a paper, but it was also a talk. We had a couple other people, like Daniela did a talk she did an application of Benebrains to economic systems. So that was really interesting. Jesse did a submission in conjunction with plot twisters. And then we did another one, which I can't remember what it was. So we had 4, and then this time we had 4 submissions, and it was Brian had one on neurophenomenology. Jesse and myself, we had one on metabrains. Oh, and also with Avery. Then we had Amanda and Jesse and myself, and I think Brian and Morgan had one on the methodology. And then there was a 4th one, which was the cognitive offloading, the development of cognitive offloading, but Jesse, myself, and Angela Pang. And so that's something we had presented previously. So that we had that was the 3rd talk in that series. So, that's a lesson is, one of the lessons here is that, you can take a talk and have different versions of it. I can have a talk. We started at the cognitive offloading workshop in 2021 with this cognitive offloading work. I presented it for that. And then I did another presentation with Jesse and Angela were also involved in this. But I gave the presentation at Embodied Intelligence, that workshop, and then finally here at Neuromatch. And they all have different things in them. So they're all different, they all have different foci. You have the basic argument, the basic slides, but then you change out some of the slides for the different audiences. The same thing with the metabrains. With our metabrains talk to Neuromatch 5, we had a focus on allostasis and some of those mechanisms, whereas the talk to Biko was more about some of the applications and some of the details of how it works. So that, those are things when you do a presentation, you want to be able to make it so that you can redo it in for different audiences, for different conferences coming forward. And so that's a very valuable thing, because sometimes, you don't want to have to reinvent the wheel for every conference you go to. Sometimes you want to show your work to different groups of people, and that's how you do it. You basically have the same slide deck, and you change out some of your slides depending on who's there. So
I just wanted to add one thing, Bradley. If I remember right, Neuromatch has the name Neuromatch because part of it was connecting you to people that you weren't necessarily working with and in the same area.
Yeah.
Right? Like that was a big part of it. If anybody wonders about how it got its name, you were going to be put in a pod with people. Like you submit some papers you've done or a text blurb about your research interests, and then there's some algorithm. I have no idea.
Oh, yeah.
If I remember right.
So that's worth revisiting as well. So the original conference was based on this algorithm that Conrad Korting and some collaborators had created to match people in different areas of science. So you would take the first Neuromatch we had. We were participating. We would submit some abstracts of our recent papers or some interest areas, and then it would match us with people. And so I think one of the aspects, the first one was you'd meet with people with common interests, and they do this with the academy as well. You have people in the academy who get matched to different group, or mentors who get matched to different groups using that same thing. So when you apply to be a mentor, you put in some abstracts from your papers and you get assigned to a group.
Because I remember the first ICLR during COVID, they tried to do this, and I think at least in this ICLR one, it was definitely like try and meet people outside of your research area to foster cross interest collaboration kind of thing.
Yeah. So
but when it first started, I remember somebody saying like Neuromatch, like, is that some sort of like dating for neuroscientists? Like,
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know why because like in this last one, they call it Neuromatch 22, it's Neuromatch 5, it's the fifth one. But they didn't have anything to do with that. It didn't really even have that kind of flavor to it. It was just kind of like there were a lot of like panels and group talks. There were really interesting talks on different things, different topics like scientific publishing and some other things, but they didn't have that matching aspect.
They grow up so quickly.
Yeah. So why don't I go over some of the things in our Slack channel on Neuromatch. So we have a Neuromatch Slack channel, and that's usually like for organizing for Neuromatch, the conference, but also the academy stuff. So, this is not active all the time. It's usually active when we have the conference going on. So we got the flash talks out, and those are all on our YouTube channel. And I think I showed where those are last week. They're all up there now, all 4 of them for this year. This was they had like the title slide, and you could put your title on, and so we had that. And then in numbers, there were 4 keynotes, 3 panels, 2 bridge the gap sessions. They actually had this interesting thing. It's NMC for kids, so it's basically like they do this. So I think there's in Frontiers journals, they have a Frontier Science for Kids or something where they do these articles where they explain something for children, maybe like, preteens, late childhood from maybe like 8 to 15 or something. They explain these concepts in science, and they do it in a way that's appealing to kids, that's at their level. And so that's interesting. They've experimented with this, I think, in previous Neuromatch sessions, but this is the first one, I think, where they've had a dedicated session for kids. And then 21 short talks and 105 flash talks. So we had 4 of the 105 flash talks out of our group. Then we had, then Jesse and I were putting things in the channel here during the Neuromatch. If you're interested, it's on crowdcast.io. So I don't know if you can register on Crowdcast to watch what was in the conference, but it's all archived up there on Crowdcast. And I think if you go to the website, neuromatch.io, and you go to the conference, it should be the 5th conference, should be up there. And then you should have a link to the Crowdcast. But that's where all these lectures are. So they're all archived. They were asynchronous. One of the problems, or maybe it was one of the things that we didn't get, like in past Neuromatches, there were, there was a very lively community discussion during the Neuromatch, and it was especially when we were all kind of virtual. It was very lively, and when it was new, it was exciting. And then this year, it was kind of very disembodied, as I mentioned to Jesse. It was, you would have the talks on Crowdcast. It was asynchronous, and you'd attend them, and there was a chat on the Crowdcast channel. So you have the video in the chat, but it didn't feel like, didn't feel live or anything like that this year. It was very disembodied.
It's funny. One of the big events this week was this precision health and wellness and psychiatry. But and Joshua Gordon, director of NIMH, is talking about like the big effects, the big psychological effects of COVID, and we still don't understand and things like that. And I gotta say, like, I think like this has something to do with the conference, or like some of it's like people are going back, like restrictions are going down,
Yeah.
and like life is changing again. So much is online.
Yeah.
Like there's so many competing online interests now, and it's like if you can be asynchronous, then like why be live?
Right. Yeah.
Like it's got to be a kind of, well, again, like competing with in person live events is difficult. Or yeah. Anyway, I noticed that too. Or like the numbers, the online numbers were much lower. Or like like an order of magnitude lower.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, the Bika conference, which I attended the week before, was different. It was like everything was in Zoom, and then you had people in Mexico, and you had people everywhere else, and
Yeah.
there were actually quite a few people in virtually, and it was they had to coordinate all of that, and so it's one of the things we're interested in this in the lab here is how to coordinate these hybrid events. How do you get like people maybe in a physical place and then coordinating them off in the virtual world and then bringing that together. It's not easy. It's a lot of work to get like not just the technical aspects, but the flavor of it and the feel of it. That so that you don't feel like you're like in the Bika session. Sometimes you would have like a camera in the room in Mexico, and it was like they were there and you couldn't hear what was going on, and then they were like doing technical stuff, and you'd have to wait, and so it's like very. But that's the nature of these hybrid events. But this one was interesting because the way they split it up, they had like for Neuromatch, they had sessions kind of like for Europe and Asia, which were like for North America, it was like from 2 in the morning to like 10 in the morning or 9 in the morning. So it was obviously overnight. And then they had sessions for North America and maybe parts of Europe where it was like in North America it was like started at 9 o'clock and it went to like 1:30 in the afternoon. So it was like you had that for just those different parts of the world, and then you could watch it asynchronously. So that's another thing you have to keep in mind is you have this time zone shift, and you want to be inclusive to the rest of the world. So that always plays a role in that as well. But I don't want to dwell too much on the feel of it and that. I want to get into some of the topics. So there were some interesting talks. There was Ida, and we've talked about Ida's work before. This was an interesting talk on the varieties of human-like agents in neural AI. So she's interested in neural AI and this interface between neuroscience and AI. And there's this graph here, maybe summarizes it. You're looking for three things, basically. You have three axes to evaluate this kind of work. One is the benchmarks and the engineering aspect. So this is an example of a benchmark data set here, and it's number recognition. So you're recognizing the machine is recognizing numbers, classifying them properly or improperly, and you use these benchmarks to evaluate your algorithm. And then this is like an engineering feat because when you benchmark something, you usually have an accuracy rate, and you're trying to get the accuracy rate really close to 100. So this is not work that like is particularly creative. You put a benchmark out there, you get like 95%, and then you try to engineer it so that you get closer and closer to 100. As it turns out, this is probably asymptotic to 100. So you're just improving just small, tiny increments, but that's the nature of that work. And so, but to get to that algorithm where you can get a pretty high rate of success, you need to have other aspects to the neuro AI. So one is neural plausibility. So we want to make them like the brain because we know the brain does this type of thing. It classifies things, it operates on information, it does different things like that. And the question is, how much like a brain do we need to be? So do we need to be exactly like a brain or kind of like a brain, or maybe we don't care about brains at all. Maybe it's just better just to have something that's like a self-organizing map. I guess a self-organized map isn't totally unlike a brain, but that's just one. I just threw out that name because that's something that people have used to do pattern recognition and things like that. So there's neural plausibility. Then there's human-like behavior. So we want the behavior to be more human-like, or maybe more like animals, or maybe it doesn't have to even be plausible. So when you say something is human-like, it means, like maybe the gait is human-like, or you have language in speech and things like that. So you want to make it human-like. If you have like something like a linguistic task, you want it to behave like a human, or an avatar in a virtual world, you want it to behave like a human. So that's all part of this neuro AI area. And these are the three axes that she's proposing in the talk. So this is all kind of focused on human-like agents, but I think it's very interesting, some of the things that she kind of points out in this talk. I think Jesse had another, okay, this is another screenshot from her talk, where this is NeuroNav, which is in beta. This is a piece of, it's open source software. NeuroNav is an open source library for neurally plausible reinforcement learning. So this is a reinforcement learning technique, which is similar to how the brain maybe learns about stimuli, how it learns about reward and things like that. It offers a set of standardized environments in RL algorithms drawn from canonical behavior, meaning just kind of drawn from typical animal behaviors, and neural studies in rodents and humans. So this is where you have these behaviors that you can classify, different parts of the brain that you can mimic, and you can build this reinforcement learning platform that allows you to sort of, achieve different things like, goal-directed behaviors and classifications at a very high success rate. So this is something that they've published on NeuroNav. And so Jesse was in the chat here making a lot of insightful comments. I saw him in another session making some insightful comments as well. This is just this one talk. I think that was actually one of the more interesting talks, at least for our group, because I think we do a lot of stuff with neuro AI. We kind of approach it differently. We don't really have a manifesto or anything, but we approach it a little bit differently than how she's proposing it be approached here. But then Jesse said, I asked this at the start of the talk, so it wasn't very specific. I didn't realize she'd be going into all the things she did, but it was replied to somewhat. And this is this question that got 2 upvotes. What methodologies existing or yet to be innovated do you think will be important for making AI more human or more robust? And so this is Worldwide Neuro answered, $1 million question, but my own approach is to go for those that are interpretable and principled based on our cognitive capacities. So I guess the idea is, like, again, to go back to the brain and look at what's going on there. I guess the human brain would be a good model, but there are other animal models, of course, that are probably just as, maybe they're more suited, because there are some animals that have very specialized behaviors and they have specialized neural circuits for them. And so it's worth thinking about that. But it's definitely something, they don't mention biologically inspired here, but our approach is to be biologically inspired. Some people just, think the human brain is the thing you need to sort of chase after. So there are differences in that. So then there was this other slide from NeuroAI where this is actually, I think, a different session where they talked about NeuroAI. This is Anthony Zador, Bing Brunton, Matthew Botvinnik, and this is a session that they had. So this is one of these panels where they talked about NeuroAI, and they talked about, how neuroscience and AI intersect. So that was an interesting talk as well. It was a little bit different perspective on it. It was more of an interactive chat. People were talking about maybe the best path forward. So that's all I'm going to talk about with respect to Neuromatch. It was a great time. And again, you can watch it on Crowdcast if you're interested. Did we have anything we wanted to talk about before we move on? Any questions?
Ida's got a great toolbox as well. I don't know if you covered that. And it's OpenAI Gym compatible.
Okay.
If I remember right. So it should work with. So she provides, I think, a number of environments, but perhaps environments and agents. I can check.
Okay.
But but that you can play with in simulation.
Yeah, I think I remember this one. This is like, it's a nice toolbox, different. Yeah. So we talked about doing this and this was something that Himanshu was trying to do over the summer. He didn't quite get there with the, because it's a very hard thing to work with, apparently. At least the AI gym type things that exist now.
I think he was working with the more advanced. That's the petting zoo.
Yeah, the petting zoo.
Yeah.
So
that's
I mean,
the multi-agent reinforcement. Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know if she has a link to the toolbox, or if you can put it in the chat. It'd be good. Yeah. So I mean, but that's something that we're looking to for our own work in terms of putting agents in a different sets of environments and testing it out. So yeah, this is the paper. This is petting zoo. Yeah. So this is the thing that we were covering. We were trying to sort of work with this summer. It was kind of a reach goal, but I think this is something that maybe people, if they want to try to get it working, it's something that would be useful to the work that we're doing with agents, and not just like the agents from the open source agent-based models, but other types of models computational models. So Petting Zoo is just a library of different types of environments. They have an agent environment cycle that allows you to plug in different games and other types of things for the agents to interact with. They have an API, but it's pretty hard to work with, at least in the short term. You really have to spend a lot of time getting it to work. So, but this is a type of thing that people are using to train agents in different environments. So one of our constraints, of course, is that we train agents and that they're very limited in what they're exposed to. They're exposed maybe to a data set like the MNIST data set, or they're exposed to some environment where they have like four walls and some objects that they interact with. But that's the extent of their world. If you have an interface where you can put them in different environments, that's kind of what you want. Or something that's like a virtual environment where it's more complex. Well, in any case, that's useful. And then Amanda mentions here in the chat RE conference format. The 2022 Computational Psych Conference has been a nice example of hybrid conferences, at least from the perspective of me listening to the recording of the live sessions, mixed question and answer from live and virtual audience, and a reference list. Yeah, that's definitely a set of Morgan.
Yeah, it's an amazing resource.
Yeah. So yeah, I like that when they have they're very flexible in how they present it. So sometimes I'll be watching these things while I'm working, and you can go back to a certain point in the video and listen to it again, and yeah, so it's very nice, very flexible format. And I like these sort of interactive parts of it where you can put embed reference lists or different things that you can link to later. So if I want to know more about this topic, and they did this with Neuromatch where they linked to a preprint. So we have our I put a blog post up, I think I showed it last week, where we have the 4 talks and links to the preprints and the YouTube talks. So that's where all that is. But yeah, definitely, if you're interested in hybrid conferences, we can talk about that more later.
But if I could, I think Amanda's talking about the Zurich course. But this week was also the second Stanford's Precision Health and Wellness in Psychiatry Symposium, and just a one-day set of talks. But like I said, started with NIMH director and just covering, the big change just the big change in psychiatry in terms of RDoC and the more kind of comprehensive interdisciplinary approaches to research and potentially to care. But really, really interesting talks from some people like Carl Dijsselroth, where just some great examples. Like the talks will all be available. I put a link in, hopefully in computational psychiatry. But I don't think the videos are released yet, but coming soon. And really, really interesting work where he's going back and forth between, this is someone very famous for his work in optogenetics. But for the symposia, he's really focused on his interdisciplinary research group that pulls in anesthesiologists and biomedical engineers and psychiatrists and others, all those interested in trying to get at the mechanism of ketamine dissociation, and that and like how they also had a case, an epilepsy case, where the person sees their, when they're dissociating, really gets to experience their body from the outside. And how this work was useful in identifying a particular area that they could stimulate and bring this dissociation out. Like his optogenetics work, like make it on demand. And again, really, really interesting work in terms of thinking about embodiment and thinking about how our brain is doing this kind of processing and in relation to what. So it really, as some of the speakers had started the talk with, and especially Joshua Gordon, talking about they were referring to it as like the new medications coming, and what they meant was just like, because psychiatry doesn't have any new drugs, that they're looking to things like psilocybin and ketamine and drugs that we've already had, but as then somebody said, like, we don't actually know how any of these work. The last speaker was really interesting. He was definitely an old school psychiatrist who had seen lots of drugs come and go, and he wanted to really emphasize that, like, the efficacy of these new drugs is not what they claim. Which I thought was kind of a funny way to end the comments. He wanted to get at, like, why all these claims were totally overblown, which I thought was funny. But again, like, really fast, but the set of speakers that they had all had connections to these drugs, as well as, the interactions with cognitive behavioral therapy and other techniques. And it was really interesting. Great set of speakers. And yeah, I can't wait till those are all available. But the Dijsselroth, from a neurotech standpoint, the Bao Labs work was like this incredible material science, like stretchy electrodes, nets, and all sorts of wonderful materials that she was developing. And there's some really amazing videos and other resources from her lab, but. Anyway, I'll check that there's a link, and yeah, the Dijsselroth, check out.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
So Amanda put something in the chat. I like the audio of someone speaking in a row conference room. Yeah.
Yeah, there's something about listening just like a purely aesthetic thing. I get tired of listening to like what's clearly just a Zoom meeting. It's nice to have the audio of a conference room. I don't know.
Yeah.
But like Bradley said, like as long as you can hear what questions being asked, you know.
Yeah, it was good audio.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah, that was great, Morgan. Thanks for the update on that. Sounds like an interesting session.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and then that's in the Slack.
I'll check. I'll check. I've got that there.
Yeah. So yeah, it's on.
But did you cover the Allen Institute Open Neuro Data Showcase?
Oh, I didn't. No, I didn't. What was...
that was really interesting. So this was it was kind of, I mean, certainly for those who'd done any Neurodata Without Borders events before, it was also a chance to just run through. You know, it was talks by the Neurodata Without Borders people, the Dandy Archive, and Data Lab. So Yarrick and Satra were speakers, as well as Ben, I think is Ben Dichter is the Neurodata Without Borders PI, and but then they had poster sessions too on a number, you know, people who've submitted data sets, and so those and again, like you know, Dandy Archive has data sets that like require an incredible amount of funding to collect, you know, but like to get the equipment and to you know have all those person hours and in terms of the kind of fine recordings that are being done, and you know, it's anyway, as they stated, you know, the big purpose of Dandy Archive is making these you know, brain initiative data sets available for what they call secondary analysis, and making that a you know, a good, accessible, like they said, a fair resource, so that it's and there are some and the is it open scope? Is it Mindscope or Open Scope? These are both the Allen Institute projects. So Christoph Koch is the Open Scope. I forget his official title, or Mindscope program.
Okay.
But these are the the very difficult to collect data sets that the Allen Institute produces. So, you know, these I think it's like really, really incredible neuropixel data sets from mice, right?
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. They have that whole mouse atlas that is like,
as well as like
really
all the other incredible cellular work that they're doing there. And I just, okay, that is my child's. I think in organoids, I put some of the new, the Allen Institute, you know, Allen Institute leading this global collaboration. September 23rd. If you go up.
The 23rd here.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
But this is you know, apparently they didn't want to rest on their laurels, and there's a new effort.
So primate brain atlas, developing mouse brain, and then brain function research. So the developmental atlases,
that sounds particularly of interest.
Yeah, because we've explored a number of the developmental atlases in DevoWorm, but this is for like different species like fruit fly or for zebrafish or for C. elegans. And this is, of course, in, I guess, mouse brain. So that's a different type of brain. And usually, the developmental atlases I've seen have been like, well, for cell development, it's like where you have, different cells, or more likely like gene expression within the cells using some sort of next gen sequencing. So they'll use something called spatial transcriptomics, where they take the tissue and they look at what's being expressed in different parts of the tissue, or different cells in a if you have like an embryo, different cells. So it's basically spatial locations. So you're trying to find, in an atlas you would have different slices where you go through the slices and you have this spatial array of sites, and then you can tell where something is, and then you find in the brain, of course, you can register that with different areas of the brain that maybe are involved in behavior or something. So that's in the benefit of an atlas is you have all that data there. It's digitized. You can overlay things, and it's very nice work that they've provided to the community. And then this is so this is like a map of human brain cell type diversity in primary motor cortex. This is single cell transcriptomics. This is what I'm talking about. So this is where you have, for single cells, you take a single cell, you look at the transcript, which is like genes being expressed, transcription. Transcriptomics, you take all these genes that are expressed. Actually, there are multiple variants of genes that are expressed usually. You use a probe to bind them and then visualize them with these colors. And so then you can actually make statements about different cells and in a human brain cell type diversity, which is a question that's very hard to answer without this type of technology, and then having this in a atlas. So that's the value of this type of atlas. I like that they've been working on this. They haven't been resting on their laurels, as you've said.
And like we've mentioned before, the revolution in biotech right now in terms of improving the ability to spatially distinguish and to do kind of metagenomics and then reconstruct where that data came from and from what cells those came from. I'm seeing that with the Innovative Genomics Institute here at Berkeley.
Okay.
Like they'll be talking about these new techniques that they have, as well as I think you had some papers from the Diva Worm group. These the acronyms it's hard to keep up with.
Yeah.
But, all these new sec these new sec acronyms. But yeah, really terrific work, and then I don't know if you saw that, but the down at the bottom, the PI from Stanford's organoids center has a paper about wanting to be more specific about nomenclature.
Okay, this one here.
And yeah. But also wants to get rid of the term. Definitely wants to get rid of the term mini brain.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. No more mini brain or brain in a dish. Which I don't think brain in a dish was a thing except for popular science literature.
Yeah. I think they actually use that for like microelectrode arrays, where they put a bunch of cells in.
Yeah. Except for perhaps dish brain, where it was like.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. But there, it wasn't. It was definitely cells. It wasn't even an organoid there. It was just stem cells.
Yeah.
But also just nice in terms of some nomenclature that helps with navigating the literature. And Jesse had posted a paper, kind of like a frontiers map paper for computational psychiatry.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And certainly the organoid work could have a similar a similar mapping to kind of capture all the different domains that are involved, as well as like kind of help you navigate the immense amount of literature that's coming up now.
Yeah.
But
yeah, that's definitely
yeah.
useful. This is like a classification scheme. So like oftentimes in biology we'll need to establish these, especially for a new field. So like this is where you have like stem cells that are being turned into other types of cells. And then once you get the other types of cells, and there's a sort of a procedure to that that's very cryptic. I mean, we understand kind of how it works, but not entirely. Then you have these things like you go from stem cells to an unguided neural organoid, and then these different cell types where you can go directly to the cell types. And then you can ask what they call an assay, which is you can prepare them for some sort of analysis on a chip, or you can transplant them, or you can put them into what they call assembloids. So it like goes through that process. But these nomenclatures are very important for understanding like what we're talking about, because people will generate a bunch of terms, like they'll generate different terms for different things, and it's very hard to follow a lot of times in the literature what they mean. So these types of exercises are very useful for knowing exactly what we're talking about.
And Alison Moitri, who's the head of the UCSD Stem Cell Center and leads their cerebral organoid work, has some new announcements on their space mission. So this is organoids in space, which is a thing, and for for a variety of reasons. So I know that they care about the kind of microgravity work, but just to reiterate, it's something like Sierra Space. Anyway, I'll try and find a link for it, but again, like what was most interesting about Alison's work on this was that they showed accelerated aging in space. So organoids still need to grow, like all biological systems. But if you send them into space, they grow faster, and that's not a relativistic effect. It's not because they're going faster or something. So whether it's some interaction with cosmic rays or what is driving that is of great interest, and they have a new private public partnership that I think is what Sierra Space is, and as well as it was interesting. He has a tooth fairy project that. So I guess from baby teeth you can extract stem cells. And which I had thought previously that the Child Mind Institute was collecting baby teeth because it was a basically a marker of environmental exposure, but that like heavy metals and things would get deposited in your enamel, but I think it might actually be a source of stem cells, or a prolonged source of stem cells that you can use. And yeah, so Tooth Fairy project, I'll again try and drop a link. These are things that showed up on LinkedIn, but I didn't have good reference.
So we talk about a couple other things in the Brain Organoids channel. I think there's great stuff in here. There's this generation of human-induced pluripotent stem cells using non-synthetic mRNA. So this is a different way of generating these cells.
and so this is where and I think I've said this before, that like synthetic biology has an incredible role to play in the organoid work, right? And this is a great example. There's some really interesting what I would call maybe more synthetic bio papers, straight synthetic bio papers that relate to forming a membrane and controlling your environment. So I don't know if maybe I'd put something into bioevolution on that. If not, there's another really incredible paper from like mid-September.
Maybe back here somewhere. Yeah. The brain is not mental.
It's sort of like this living material assembly. But again, like to just follow up on Pasqua's assembloid,
Okay.
right? That these could mean quite a variety of things, and
Right.
And the synthetic biologists are really pushing that from a ground up perspective, seeing what like the work in Bristol on the minimal cell project. Right. So what are the basic building blocks, or the minimal basic building blocks you can use to create an artificial cell?
Yeah.
And it's somewhat related to Fentner's original like minimal chromosome, right?
Right.
So what are the minimal set of genes required to drive a cell and duplicate.
Right. Yeah, and then there's this other cell rover exploring and augmenting the inner world of the cell, which is this intracellular antenna, which allows you to wirelessly monitor what's in the cell. That's interesting because a lot of the images that we get of the cell are usually either like some sort of microscopy, or there's someone modeling it in a textbook. So this this image here is sort of a model from a textbook where you have endoplasmic reticulum and mitochondria and all these other parts of the cell, the nucleus. And this is a device that would go in and actually explore the cell, I guess.
And as you know, the big problem with these 3D assembloids, it becomes how to do the microscopy.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, and so you've got some of the techniques that are focused on clearance, right? So making all the cells clear,
Right.
so that you can see through them.
Yeah.
And other techniques to how to visualize the interior.
Right. And there's a lot of things that we do because they're transparent or they're easy to access.
And this is the real problem of as you know, the developing brain, right? Is that we really want to see it. We want the 4D image, right? And microscopy is really focused on 2D, and like that's the basic microscopy, and it's interesting to see the frontier of microscopy is how to push 3D, and even when you're not necessarily trying to look at a 3D structure, there's a lot of work on how to do 3D when you've got a set of cells and there's still like some space between them and things, and work on tagging them, and the kind of, I don't want to say optogenetics, but certainly the fluorescence with multiple tags and some multiple color fluorescence, so that you can be able to distinguish in 3D all these things. these this is the dream of some of the related brain projects, brain initiative projects. I think it was kind of neural dust, but that was kind of body wide. This is going into the cell and being able to give us information as well.
Yeah, so there's a paper here, Cell Rover in Nature Communications. So that's great. That's our Brain Organoids channel, and then the Bioevolution channel has things in it as well. Some other types of. This was a paper on coupling neuronal and immune cellular processing. So in these two channels we talk a lot about biological topics. So it's again, like I've told people before, if you're interested, don't worry about like not understanding things. It's just kind of like just let it wash over you, and ask questions, I guess, is the key. So that's great. We'll have to revisit some of those things later too. Did we have anything we wanted to, any comments or questions before we move on?
Morgan, do you have a link to the Brain Organoids in Space project?
Sure. And I will, if I haven't, I will definitely drop in his actual research work to show hopefully that's been published. Like he would talk about that in lectures, but I hadn't seen a paper for a long time. He's got a small problem with like the I'm blanking on the name, but he has a company as well. So their compact bioreactor that they sent up into the space station, to the space station, is the IP is this company. So I don't know if that's related to why we haven't seen the paper, but I will find that. And it was definitely something like Sierra Space. Yep. Okay, I got it.
Yeah, that was all super interesting.
Yeah. All right. Any other questions before we move on, or comments? Okay. Well, yeah, thank you for that update, Morgan, on those things. It's very interesting work. So let's see. I want to go to papers now. There have been a lot of interesting things going on in the world of artificial intelligence and cognitive science and the intersection there. So I've got a couple things here. First one is this. I think Morgan posted this in the Slack, but I'm going to bring it out here just as a separate thing to highlight it. There's So this is pioneering algebraic topology in the Blue Brain project. So I think we've talked about the Blue Brain project before. This was something sponsored by EPFL, and they've been working on this for a long time. The original idea was to sort of simulate the brain, so the human brain. The idea was to use artificial intelligence techniques, get some information about neurons, and put those together. And so this image here kind of shows what this part of the project, the algebraic topology aspect of it. So they have a timeline here from 2017 to the present. The Blue Brain project is much older than that, but this is what they've been focusing on. So 2017, they did this paper on cliques of neurons bound into cavities. So this sounds kind of odd, but like it's basically topological data analysis. It's using topology as a tool to look at the brain and to look at different cliques, which are these little subnetworks that are very highly densely connected, and then cavities being these holes in the topology that allow you to identify things. So people have done things on, in brain networks on cavities and things like that. That's a topological data analysis topic. So they had a paper on that in 2017. And then this paper, Topological Morphology Descriptor, which is a method for encoding the spatial structure of any neuronal tree as a barcode. So barcoding is another thing where we use like different techniques to, it's sort of a compact representation. So you can look at the spatial structure is pretty complex. It's pretty broad. How do you represent that in an algorithmic sense, very compactly? And barcodes are one way to do that. They've done this with DNA as well. There are different ways that you can do this, and it encodes basically this spatial tree structure. Then you have classifying the shapes of neurons. So this is related to what we saw with some of the nomenclature and some of the identification of different cell types. Some of the cell type is about shape. Sometimes it's about like what the cell does or what it expresses as in terms of its genes. And people will use those different criterion to classify this a neuron. But shape is also, it's a very classic method. It goes back in neuroscience probably 100 years, where when they were looking at neurons, you want to classify different properties of a different neuron. So motor neurons look different than what they call stellate neurons. They just have a different sort of structure, the projections from the cell body. And so some of the names even reflect that. Like stellate neurons is like a chandelier and has that sort of spatial extent and structure. So classifying the shapes of neurons are very important. And they've done this with algorithms. So it's pretty sophisticated work now. It used to be that they would just describe it and like write out some features, and that was the classification. Now they can do it with machine learning, and it may or may not be much more. Well, it's probably more informative, but it's not perfect. So that's something they've done. Then from trees to barcodes and back again. Now they're using barcodes to they're classifying them using symmetric groups. So this is a mathematical tool. And then finally, topological neuronal synthesis, where they've enabled with this algorithm a rapid digital reconstruction of entire brain regions from relatively few reference cells. And so this kind of goes into some of the details of this research program. And, they're kind of doing it like how we approach the developmental AI. You're laying out different markers and you're completing them one by one, and you're putting pieces together so you can get to a place where you can like combine them or recombine them. And you try to attack. That's when you have a big research area like that that's pretty unwieldy. One thing you want to do is you want to be able to identify different areas that you can focus on and then put the pieces together in different papers. So okay, so one of the main branches of pure mathematics, algebraic topology, allowed Blue Brain to describe the geometrical shapes of neurons in a way that could be used to build their digital twins, which means they can build a twin of it in a computer with a description that is pretty accurate to the original object. So Henry Markram was the founder of Blue Brain in 2005, and he's been criticized for sort of not being like sort of productive neuroscience. Like Blue Brain has been criticized for not being productive neuroscience in some ways, or not living up to the promise of simulating the brain. But they've actually produced a lot of this sort of stuff that's been very useful in terms of modeling. So so they wanted to build a digital twin of the entire mouse brain, but they haven't gotten there yet. But they're building all these different pieces that are quite useful in and of themselves. So this is kind of a lesson to say that, like, if you have a big vision, maybe you pursue the big vision and you have really interesting things that come out of it. So, so it's a very complex problem, and the way you want to approach that is to have these different pieces and put them in place and then string them together as like a research agenda. So, algebraic topology, they're kind of using this tool to make these different advances. Algebraic topology is like a telescope and a microscope at the same time. It can zoom into networks, the trees in the forest, and look at the spaces between the trees at the same time. It's particularly well suited describing and characterizing the emergence of global structures and local constraints. So that's that paper. Then there's this this is one of the papers that this is the most recent paper that they've published out of this group. This is 2022, Computational Synthesis of Cortical Dendritic Morphologies. So what they've done here is they have the synthesis method where they take this biological reconstruction of the morphology of a single neuron. They extract what they call a topological barcode, which is just an encoding that allows them to describe the structure. Then they synthesize a neuron digitally. Then they generalize this to cell groups so they can build variations on a theme of this and see how they're interconnected. But they can do all this virtually once they have this encoding. Then they can do things like reconstruct pyramidal cells, which are shaped like a pyramid, again, so that describes the shape. That's the nomenclature. And so you have this shape that's reconstructed, and then they're able to do a connectome of a biological column of these pyramidal cells that are, you can actually simulate a connectome from simulating the single reconstructed cells. You can also do these sort of synthesis of, I guess this is a different level. So you can do this for different levels. And then, this is neocortex, so there's 6 levels. And then you can actually put these levels together into a simulation of what they call a neocortical column, which are these levels like in a single column, which is a processing unit in the neocortex. So we have these columns, these little patches that have columns that go up and down the surface of the neocortex from the top to the bottom, L1 through L6. And then you have, the signals that travel up and down this cortical column. The different stages of processing that happen at each one. And then there are many of these columns in the neocortex, and information is passed between them. So you can see that they're trying to simulate an entire structure here, an entire cortical column, just from these single biological reconstructions of neurons, doing a computational treatment, both the networks and then this barcode encoding, and then building this model. So it's pretty cool work. I think it's great to see that they're doing some great work in Blue Brain. Then there's this paper on, this is shifting gears a little bit from like reconstructing the brain, which will give us a lot of information about what the brain does, or what it looks like. You can build digital twins, but we still then want to look at maybe things like development or things like cognitive abilities. And this is where this paper comes in. Multilevel development of cognitive abilities in an artificial neural network. So this is where we have a conventional neural network. It's not the model of the brain, but it's this model of developing cognitive abilities by using a neural network to do this. So this isn't like the first attempt at this. People have done this in the past, but they're doing it in a certain way in this paper. So this is PNAS. This is a cognitive science oriented paper. So they actually have a significant statement, which reads, multiple biological mechanisms support the unique ability of the brain to develop complex cognitive abilities. So, it's basically a generic statement to say that all these mechanisms that I showed you in the last paper, they support what is complex cognitive ability. Now, we don't know what that is necessarily from the model that I showed you, but it's, that's something that people are trying to figure out exactly what that is. And of course, you would have to have a lot of those columns in parallel to do anything like a cognitive complex ability. Nevertheless, it remains unclear which mechanisms are necessary and sufficient. So we don't actually know if all the mechanisms that are in that kind of a digital model are necessary or sufficient for generating complex cognitive abilities. Some of them may be unrelated to cognition. Others might be critical to cognition. We don't know. We propose a neurocomputational model of the developing brain, spanning sensory, motor, cognitive, and conscious levels. The model solves 3 tasks of increasing complexity. from visual recognition to cognitive manipulation and maintenance of conscious percepts. So we're going from very simple visual recognition, recognizing an object, to manipulating things cognitively, so maybe like putting them in different perspectives or figuring out what the features are of that of the visual scene, and then maintenance of conscious percept. So when you have the conscious percept, how does it get maintained and operated on? Results highlight two fundamental mechanisms for the multi-level development of cognitive abilities. So this multi-level. It doesn't necessarily map to those levels that I showed you of a neocortical column, but there are these levels of different types of cognitive processing. And then the idea would be to map maybe between things you find in the brain and cognition. So there are two fundamental mechanisms here. One is what they call synaptic epigenesis, with Hebbian learning at the local scale and reinforcement learning at the global scale. So what they mean here is that they're interested in how the in this case, a neural network might learn. And one of the things that we do is we worry about weights and the connections between cells. And so here they're using two learning rules. And the first one is Hebbian learning, which is the local scale. So it's like a single connection or a single weight would be governed by Hebbian learning. And if you don't know what Hebbian learning is, it's a classic idea of things that are active together will tend to reinforce each other. And then reinforcement learning at the global scale. So reinforcement learning is learning with respect to some reward. So if I reward a certain policy or behavior, it's repeated. So you have this sort of feedback or positive feedback in both of these. But there are different scales of organization. Now the second mechanism is self-organized dynamics through spontaneous activity and balanced excitatory inhibitory ratio of neurons. So what that means is that you have activity of between these different cells, and that activity is there's something that self-organizes from it. If you have different ratios of different types of neurons, if they're excitatory or inhibitory, it has an effect on the global behavior. It has an effect on the dynamics of what's going on. So spontaneous activity as well. Sometimes spontaneous activity is important for maintaining some of these things, like maintaining conscious percepts. Now we emphasize how these core features of human intelligence could guide future development in artificial intelligence. So in the abstract, they talk about this. They talk about what they're trying to mimic is the formation of cognitive abilities through postnatal interactions with the physical and sociocultural environment. So this is this 3-level model. The first sensory motor level handles local non-conscious processing, here during a visual classification task. The second level, or cognitive level as I call it, globally integrates the information from multiple local processors via long-range connections and synthesizes it into a global but still non-conscious manner. So they synthesize things globally first into a non-conscious representation or non-conscious process. But the third and cognitively highest level handles the information globally and consciously. So this is where they bring consciousness into it. So it's also global, but it's conscious. It is based on the global neuronal workspace theory, which is something that if you read in the consciousness literature is one of the candidate mechanisms for consciousness, global workspace theory. I'm not really sure about the different classifications of different theories and their efficacy, but it's a pretty big debate as to what a good model for consciousness is. Neuronal workspace theory is I think it's related to integrated information, if I'm correct. But you're going to say something, Morgan?
I think it's one of the competing ones with.
Okay.
One, like you said, I'm not too familiar with the details. Like, what does that operationally mean?
Yeah.
you know, and I mean, with a lot of these, you know, I still want to see, which I think, you know, Dumas does. You know, I want to see that computationally. Like,
Right.
what does that mean in a toy system or something, at least? But I'm trying to think of the French researcher. He's now the head of Neurospin, but I think he developed this this particular. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm blanking on his name, but I thought of it when Jesse posted the paper. Yeah, Dahan. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah, I'm getting old. But I thought of this when Jesse posted the paper about like where does our math sense come from?
Right.
Or like what's the building blocks? Like Dahan's done a lot of great work on numeracy,
Yeah.
cognitive numeracy, and but I would love to get at like how this differs from IIT.
Right.
And you know, and usually with the complaint about IIT is that it is computational, but it's not calculable.
Right.
That you know, it's kind of like trying to do bottom up quantum theory, where it's just like there's too much to calculate, and so it's just not tractable. You know?
Yeah. So yeah, this is a debate. I mean, you know, it's a pretty complex debate, and there are a lot of things about how, you know, how to formalize it and how to do that. So in this case, they're using global neuronal workspace theory, and they're operationalizing it in this kind of neural network. They're using things like trace and delay conditioning tasks to challenge the second and third levels. Results first highlight the necessity of epigenesis, which is a term that they use. You know, I don't think it's like how they use it in epigenetics, but that's a loaded term because it means many things in different fields. But through the selection and stabilization of synapses at both the local and global scale, and that allows the networks to solve the first two tasks. So, and then at the global scale, dopamine appears necessary to properly provide credit assignment, despite the temporal delay between perception and reward. And this is just, you know, an observation of how, you know, to identify different neural pathways from this in this network and how those things are specified. And then at the third level, the presence of interneurons becomes necessary to maintain a self-sustained representation within the GNW in the absence of sensory input. So they have all these different mechanisms they're interested in. It's very, sometimes it's very hard to follow like why they're doing what. But if you want to read the paper, you know, it gets into some of this, some of the details. We discussed the plausibility of the model in both neurodevelopmental and artificial intelligence terms. So this is both like interesting from like a neurodevelopmental standpoint, but also an artificial intelligence standpoint. And so they have like kind of a network architecture here showing the three levels, and then metacognitive, conscious and cognitive, or yeah, metacognitive, conscious and cognitive, and then sensory motor. So the metacognitive is above the three levels. And then they actually train it on these tasks. So this is the visual recognition task. They use MNIST, which is that benchmark data set. They use other visual stimuli here of different patterns. And then the pattern reconstructions are in C and D. So this is MNIST, the training data set. And then as it goes through the model or goes through the different layers, it gets represented in different ways. So this is representation, I think before learning, so it's kind of randomized. It's like noise, and then after learning, it's starting to form these shapes of the letters, or the numbers. So you can see 3, 4, 5, 0, 9. So it's identifying each of these numbers, and it's kind of building the shape as it learns using these different heuristics. So this is through Hebbian learning, but also reinforcement learning. So this is, yeah, and then they show kind of like how these delay conditioning tasks work, where you have a stimulus and a trigger, and then showing the output. Yeah, and so this is something definitely, you know, we can revisit. Just a lot of difficult methods to get your head around. So,
but they make a, you know, there's code available,
yeah,
and
yeah.
to work with, and I checked it out, and it's this is just a sub project in a larger project that like if you follow Dumas on Twitter, he's at Introspection. You know, he talks about the kind of the long history of this work. He also talks about how, you know, when he was, I think, just a master's student at École Normale Supérieure, you know, that when he would bring up Varela, people would be like, you know, like, you know, who's that, or, you know, what's that, or what does this have to do with, you know, science? And now, you know, it's like people are coming to him asking, like, did Varela do something on this or that? But it's definitely been a long time coming, he said, this paper. And you know, and like, and he's still going with this, you know, and I thought of you when you, I mean, I thought of this when you posted the I think a cultural, well, definitely talking about the cultural interactions with the system, and learning. Like I forget the exact reference, but anyway, like Dumas definitely he responded to a similar reference with, like, you know, like, challenge accepted. I'm gonna, you know, we're gonna pull in cultural effects next.
Yeah,
you know?
yeah.
And yeah.
But this is great. Yeah, this is great work, and you know, it's definitely, you know, we've been covering some of these developmental approaches, and this is definitely one that
well, I've definitely also thought of your layers paper.
Oh yeah,
you know,
yeah, definitely.
in presentation, like this is you know, this is kind of getting at like somebody actually trying to, you know, do it computationally, and you know, with a problem. Again, like, I'd love to you know, take time to go through what else they're trying to do, and see. Well, yeah.
Yeah. So they also mention in the last part of the paper, they talk about beyond these features, the prolonged postnatal brain development with a proper cascade of critical periods. So we talk about critical periods a lot. Leverages the multiple non-genetic interactions of the physical, social, and cultural environment, ultimately giving rise to categorically human-specific cognitive abilities, including the recursivity of language. So that's definitely that next step is you know, critical periods, cultural effects, etc.
And if you're you know, again, like, I think it would be somebody like Josh Tenenbaum, or the woman at Berkeley, developmental psychologist at Berkeley, who
Upnick.
Yeah. Who's, you know, keynotes at a lot of AI conferences. You know, like we probably have a lot to learn from, you know, babies.
Yeah.
and their development, and so, you know, yeah, like, do we have critical periods? You know, great set of or great speaker to, you know, this week from the Continual AI group, you know, which is a little like active inference, is that it's you know, it's kind of a meta group of researchers that have focused on continual learning. But again, like, you know, catching their talk, it was very much a machine learning talk. You know, they weren't really trying to grab or perhaps, you know, emulate anything from development. You know, it was definitely like shaving off a bit more improvement in terms of the learning model, or in this case, like the the problem with forgetting, catastrophic forgetting. So but I think there's sort of really promising things from Dumas' approach, and just be great to find. I dropped another link that I only saw last night from Pierre Bellic, who's also in Montreal.
Yeah.
And but perhaps a bit more, from the neuroimaging side, and not this kind of modeling side, but just reflects the really interesting set of researchers and environment there in Montreal with people at Mila and people in psychiatry and psychology. Really fascinating work there.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, so that's that paper. And then I think so that we covered that. And then there's this, and I'm not going to spend too much time on this. We have about 5 minutes left, but there's this paper by Chris Elias-Smith, who's actually a philosopher at Waterloo in Canada, and he's this is a topics in cognitive science paper. So this is where they set up controversies in cognitive science and kind of address them.
He's definitely computational too.
Oh yeah, he's definitely computational, but he's a philosopher. He takes a philosophical approach.
Yeah.
And so this is something that where he talks about complex systems as sort of like this idea that we approach in, we call the brain a complex system, for example. And then, so he talks about the complex systems approach to characterizing cognitive function as purported to underlie a conceptual methodological revolution by its proponents. And there are different ways that people have done this through networks or through other types of things. I examine one central claim from each of the contributed papers, and this, I guess, is a special issue on complex systems, and argue that the provided examples do not justify calls for radical change in how we do cognitive science. So this is very much a Jesse paper, which I think maybe we'll go maybe more in depth in this maybe next week, where Jesse's here. But instead, I note how currently available approaches in standard cognitive science are adequate, or even more appropriate for understanding the CSA provided examples. So this is, I think, a special issue where they have a bunch of papers that have this sort of approach. It uses dynamic systems theory and gets into some computational issues. So this is definitely, an interesting kind of review of these. So, they're dealing with things like characterizing the brain or cognition using complex systems approaches. So they do things like look at power law relationships, fractal relationships, networks. I don't think they talk about networks too much in here, but there's this different approach to cognition from like the information processing approach that we're typically used to. And so, and I see Tony Chamero has a paper in here. So yeah, they definitely want to leave this. When Jesse's here, we can engage with it more directly. But this is a nice paper that I found that kind of goes through the sort of critique of cognitive science and where we are. So
that's awesome.
Yeah.
It's funny because he gave a talk here, or at least ACM San Francisco Bay on Monday, and it was like a new neural network for optimal time series processing. I just dropped in the data sci ML.
Okay, yeah.
So I didn't realize that he also had a cross appointment in philosophy.
Yeah.
That's awesome. So if people don't know, he's also I think the CEO of Applied Brain Research. So this is an old company. I mean, I think they were doing, I think they were doing like neural network, like chips, very early on. Like, I'm not even sure. I mean, I want to say like 20 years, like they've been a company. Anyway, they've got implementations on neuromorphic chips. Intel's conference was this week. And Intel has a new neuromorphic chip So Lohi was the last generation. I forget what they're calling this one, but his Nengo package, NENGO package, is you can find online, and it has some of these some implementations. Although they've patented this Legendre memory unit. Excuse me for my throat. They've actually patented this particular technique, this particular recurrent neural network that he's using in this this talk. But you can find a freeware implementation or an open source implementation in Keras. And it really does seem like it would be really useful for doing, especially like electrophysiological time series modeling. But love to see a paper of his as a critique of cognitive science.
Yeah.
And certainly is someone who's been really involved. I mean, Waterloo is a powerhouse in mathematics and mathematics and physics, and where he's been for decades, doing cool stuff. That's awesome.
Yeah. Okay. Well, yeah. So if anyone has any comments or questions, now's the time, or otherwise we're going to wrap it up for this week. Do you have anything to say, Amanda?
No, just thank you for all of the interesting conversation.
Yeah, and I'll put links to the materials in the Slack general channel.
I was wondering. I mean, Wednesdays is just tough for me.
Yeah.
But it was really interesting to hear about the book that I think Jesse posted about where does our mathematics come from, and was wondering how much is that the kind of cognitive futures focus.
Oh yeah, I think we do a lot of that sort of stuff. It's just kind of like going over a lot of different topics, like with respect to like mathematics and philosophy and the history and of cognitive science. It's very, very diverse, but I think that would fit in. Yeah.
Well, I mean, just certainly,
nebulous.
Say again.
It's kind of nebulous.
It's kind of nebulous.
Reading group, but I think that the mathematics book will be more relevant soon, especially related to what Brian is working on.
Yeah.
Gotcha. The intuitionist mathematics and neuro. Yeah, right.
Yeah, and that's all coming from LogicCL, and I just kind of bring it up because I'm excited, and I think that's the best part about Cognitive Futures is that if you get excited about something, you're just like, hey, everybody, I read this thing. This is crazy. What do you think? And I think that's the beauty of it.
Yeah, cool. Well, I mean, certainly, Dahan is one of the people that I think of when I think about like someone, a cognitive scientist or cognitive neuroscientist working on numeracy. Where does numeracy come from? The problem of like what's the what are the smallest parts? I forget the way Jesse framed it, but getting at like the units of our math understanding or something like is much more difficult. But really looking forward to the cognitive modeling school. I mean, I think that these it's really like the computational cognitive model you have like will have parts. Whether those are the smallest parts, I don't know. those are the smallest parts of an implementation, or at least of a model. But that was really interesting, and I'm trying to get that book, read that book.
Okay. Well, thanks for attending, and see you in Slack. See you next week.
Take care.
Take care.